You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The reading of ancient history is extremely tough and confusing. But even if we have actual texts to read, every country has parts of their history that they would rather erase for one reason or another. Japan is no exception with this, with history in general, but still most definitely in ancient history too. Whether modern cultures agree, even extant contemporary cultures thought particular histories in Japan were important to record, so they did. This is the main reason that the 2013 Tomb Raider game exists, because as a close to contemporary source as we have, Wei Zi, the Records of Wei, was written by basically Chinese anthropologists and compiled around 297 CE. And no lack of detail is going to hinder the game writers from creating a truly epic story, with even myths going off the rails. But then, it wouldn't be a Tomb Raider game without that, now would it? My name's Renee, you're listening to Detours in Archaeology, and this is the Tomb Raider vs. the Storm Queen, Yamatai Cage Grudge Match. Tomb Raider 2013 was far from the first piece of art or writing to discuss Queen Himiko of what would have been known by the Chinese as Wa. Others, even the first, the Wei records from Chinese sources, don't depict her in a negative light. Of course, there could be political rhetoric or cultural bashing that I could never understand, as I am not from those cultural backgrounds, nor couldn't I read the original text. But she seems to be painted in a very good light. It was even written that she sent emissaries to China so that her kingdom could join China as sort of a vassal state. And sure, this could have been written or done for any number of reasons, but if China really hated her, they probably wouldn't have let her stay in power. Of course, this is all relayed by Chinese writers, but if there was fighting or a Japanese surrender, you know that they would have exploited that and praised their leaders until the end of time. But before I get too deep into the history, let's start the walkthrough of the story of the game. For the full context of my experience with writing this, I played the game back in 2013. I haven't touched it or watched it until watching MK Ice and Fire's approximately 6-hour-long YouTube walkthrough of the game without commentary. So, while taking notes, I already knew the general storyline and wrote my commentary based on prior knowledge. I would also say that I didn't know anything about the real Himiko or Yamatai prior to researching this, but it wouldn't much matter because the vast majority of what they do in this story is completely fictional, and not even in the mythologically fictional way. The game opens with the enormous storm that causes the ship that the main characters are on to crash into the uncharted island somewhere. The game opens with the enormous storm that causes the ship, the Endurance, a metaphor for the game really, that the characters are on to crash on an uncharted island somewhere in the Dragon's Triangle, which is a thing that does actually exist in the real world and is also known as the Devil's Triangle. It's located in the Pacific or Philippine Sea south of Tokyo and centered on the Izu Islands. It has a loosely defined boundary points at Guam, Luzon, and Miyake Island. Just like the Bermuda Triangle, people say that they have seen things like ghost ships, sea monsters, UFO sightings. They've had lapses in time and malfunctioning electrical equipment. But that's probably because it sits right on the Ring of Fire, which can cause underwater seismic activity and active vents that cause sudden rogue waves, steam explosions, and churning whirlpools. Tectonic shifts from the meeting of ocean plates create sudden violent weather and unstable sea surfaces. And as for magnetic anomalies, local shifts in volcanic rock can temporarily disrupt compasses and navigational tools. Science. We learn through flashbacks, mostly when Laura is sitting at campsites, which are checkpoints throughout the game, that she and her friend Sam had recently graduated college and were on a research expedition funded by Sam's parents and another character, Whitman, who is a TV personality, the archaeologist, to find the fabled kingdom, island, or islands of Yamatai. They say they're on Yamatai in the game, so maybe they only mean one. Sam is, of course, very excited about this. One, she's a photojournalist, kind of, so she's recording all the interviews and everything for the TV show. But mainly because her best friend will hopefully be getting her big break at the same time, but also because her family line is supposed to trace directly back to Himiko. However, none of the contemporaneous Chinese sources, nor the Japanese sources, Nihon Shoki or Kojiki, which were published later in 760 CE and 712 CE respectively, explicitly state whether Himiko had children. But if Himiko had children, or rather an heir, there was a likely hereditary framework for the line of succession, whether through matrilineal or patrilineal lines for Yamatai's transition of authority, similar to the other kingdoms in East Asia. Like in this game, it would definitely be more for a girl to take her place rather than a boy, but who knows. But nothing. No record of succession, no record of a succession crisis, and no record of another ruler of Yamatai. It just stopped. There is, however, a recognized historiographical gap between the Weiji account and the later Japanese narrative traditions. The later sources I just mentioned only discuss inheritance and kingship in ways that influence modern, at the time, reconstructions. Some modern academics examine how yo-yoing between foreign and indigenous succession practices could shape ruler legitimacy. When discussing repercussions, it is necessary to distinguish what is explicitly attested from what is conjectured in broader East Asian history. But, assuming this whole line of succession is true in the game, which would open a whole can of worms, which I will get into later, the child must have either been well hidden and or a boy not to suffer any terrible fate before having children of their own. Admittedly, they could have been killed for any number of political reasons. So I don't think the possibility of getting power from divine royalty itself would have been worth it, but that's a whole other ball of wax. Back at the beginning, Laura survives the crashing ships thanks to a ghost or a hallucination that helps her up. Maybe that's just her delving inside herself, because that's kind of what the voiceover says. But once on shore, she gets knocked unconscious. This is not the only time that this happens, but this will be the only time I complain about this, I swear. But if she got hit in the head to the point of passing out, especially for a long time, she'd most likely be having either cerebral edema, or brain swelling, or an intracranial hemorrhage, brain bleeding, and would be in need of urgent medical intervention, or she'd die pretty freaking quick. As a person who has had the former, I know a little bit of the experience. I know it's a super common writing trope, but it just bugs me. Anyways, Laura wakes up wrapped in a cocoon cloth hanging upside down from the ceiling of a cave. Did they tie her from a stalactite? Because that's impressive, no matter how thick it is. It's also slippery, because the water is just running off of it. But also, as a side note, Did anyone else think it was stalactite with a G, just like stalagmite? Because I asked my partner, and he also thought it was a G in both words. So, that was just weird. Side note over. There are altars scattered throughout the rooms with lit red candles and other bodies hanging up and hundreds of bones scattered across the floors. The player has to light Laura on fire, who then falls on a perfectly upright piece of iron rebar, which is short for reinforced bar, that goes straight through her side. Not even discussing the tetanus shot that she must have had prior to this so she didn't die, or that she was so lucky that it didn't hit any internal organs. If she wasn't lucky, there'd be no game. But to do the least amount of new damage, she should have pulled it out from her back. She didn't know if it was thicker on the other side, and she definitely could see that it wasn't barbed on the front end. Even from an outside perspective, knowing it was an evenly shaped rebar, there is no way of knowing what the other end was exposed to, especially with all the blood around. Better safe-ish than sorry. As Laura is walking through the cave and subsequent cave systems, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of more bones in each, and dozens, if not hundreds, of hanging bodies in total. How are there so many dead people on the island? Especially without people noticing that thousands of people are going missing in this particular area, or at least trying to travel through it. This particular area, the Devil's Triangle, and they're never seen or heard from again. Classic. While the exact number of people who have gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle is unknown, historical estimates generally attribute the loss of at least 50 ships and 20 aircraft to the region, so hundreds of lives over the centuries. And it gets so much more attention in the media and books and TV shows than the Dragon's Triangle seems to get in this game. But really, the Bermuda Triangle doesn't have more deaths. It's just a shipping area that was really big throughout, the age of exploration and the Atlantic slave trade. So, hundreds of ships traveling in and out all the time. Percentage-wise, not more lost. Anyway, is the game telling me that just because it's in Asia, no one has looked into this? I would think that after the storm kept stranding people there for millennia, that there weren't strict regulations put in place that would keep everyone out of the area. Not to generalize too much on laws, but this is Japan we're talking about. Although I guess it could be international waters, since I'm not sure what the distance is from the country. And all of this cult stuff that we don't really learn much about. At this point, we do know that they hang bodies, scatter bones, light and replace candles a lot. By the way, where do they get their unending supply? Make painted handprints and suns on walls and a few different design patterns with a certain spiral. The right side up called Sacrifice is over a shrine, and around it, I actually paused and counted 59 skulls that were completely cleaned. Why would they even continue to do this sacrificing thing? It hasn't worked all the other times. Although maybe they correlate it with the timing of recent wrecks. Wouldn't that be weird? Since they weren't following practices in the way of Japanese tradition that I'm aware of, I'll skip the set dressing. Though the journal from the cult member that Laura can listen to is interesting, though still disturbing. The sacrificial shrine is in front of an etched carving of Himiko, leading to the conclusion that this is a cult that worships Himiko. But there was no cult. In any definition of the word, in any time period, there was no cult that worshipped Himiko known to modern scholarship. As Sam says, it's the game, and is actually believed to be true based on written documentation of Wang Zi. Himiko was a shamanistic queen, and it wasn't until later documents, mostly from other outside sources, that she would have ever been called anything like a witch, as Laura later comments. Unless there was extra weird shit going on, the real Himiko would have likely been deified as much as any of the other emperors, though obviously we can never know for sure. Random thing. When Laura has escaped the cave and the title is shown, she already has a wrapped up upper thigh bandage. When did she get that? She just came out. Details. As we learn throughout the game, many people have crashed on the island through the centuries. The first plan that Lara has to climb looks like, and is generally defined as, a military cargo or transport plane from World War II. I don't think this is particularly strange, but the star form decal they show is a USA marker. Again, not to say that a US pilot couldn't have crashed, but I don't know if they were included in the historical logs that Laura could find from that era. She finds Japanese soldiers and German soldiers. Gosh, the cutscenes all want Laura dead. It's crazy. But she never dies, so it's fine. Only when you're playing her. But as she is exploring the island, Lara and the player hear wolves, which do play a bit into the story, which I'll get into as it develops. However, the story does have us believe that the wolves were already on the island. Now, the islands of Japan had two distinct subspecies of gray wolf, really, that once lived on the islands. The Japanese wolf, Canis lupus hodophylax, on the southern islands of Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, and the Hokkaido wolf, Canis lupus hatai, on the northern island of Hokkaido. Both of which now extinct, as they were targets for hunting since they were perceived as pests for livestock. However, they survived in the game. Were they brought to the island? Even without the storm, which wouldn't be a thing until after Himiko died, the island seems pretty far out to sea. I'm not saying it's not possible, but finding wolves, deer, and rabbits all riding natural rafts out there seems pretty unlikely, especially after only 1,000 years. I wouldn't be surprised if, just like in Molokai, Hawaii, and in Australia, deer and rabbits were brought out for hunting, and then at some point people living there saw that they reproduced out of control, and even regular culling couldn't keep the population under control, so they brought out wolves to keep some greater balance. But there you go, making up my own nature fan fiction. Well, once Laura gets to the first campsite in the game, she lights a fire and watches the first recording on the video camera. This time I'm ignoring that she either just found the camera or pulled it from somewhere. Should she even light a fire when a bunch of crazy cult members are after her? Though, I guess if she's really cold, a fire would stop her from freezing to death, but she never even takes a jacket from any of her victims, even in the snow. It should have been a game mechanic. That, and eating. You never have to hunt again after the sequence when you learn how to aim and shoot the bow. Realistic survival mode, please. In the next cutscene, Laura finds Sam and meets the sketchy AF Matthias. Sam proceeds to tell Matthias everything, and Laura is suspicious of Matthias and extremely skeptical of Sam, even though she already said in the video that myths are based on a kernel of truth, which is how she got the crew to go along with her plan to travel to the Dragon's Triangle in the first place. Which is why she keeps saying this whole thing is all her fault. During the video, it shows that Laura argues that all of Whitman's, the lead TV archaeologist douche, all of his books say Yamatai is west, but Laura says east in the triangle, because if it was west, people would have found it by now. Which is a fair point, especially in the ocean. If there's an island, satellites probably would have picked it up. That is, of course, assuming it is still above water. But on their maps, there is a never-ending storm in one spot. which, to be fair, a few different groups throughout history have gotten trapped trying to study, or, well, disappeared, according to the outside world. But with technology in 2013, NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Association, would have been just one of the many worldwide organizations that could see straight through storm clouds. It's not that hard with satellites. In the real legends, Yamatai, or Yamatai Koku, was an ancient kingdom in proto-historic Japan during the late Yayoi period, spanning roughly the Yamatai period, spanning roughly the 1st through the 3rd century CE. Because written Japanese had not yet developed during this era, primary historical accounts rely almost entirely on early Chinese records, most notably the 3rd century records of the Three Kingdoms, in which Weizi is part. Yamatai was most famous for its shamanic monarch, Queen Himiko, who ruled from approximately 180 to 248 CE. Chinese chroniclers depict her as a spiritual leader who resided in a secluded palace protected by hundreds of handmaidens. For a lot of guys, that would have made a interesting part of the game. In 238 CE, Himiko dispatched a diplomatic delegation to the Chinese Cao Wei court, earning the official title Queen of Hua, friendly to Wei, alongside ceremonial gifts including gold, silk, and 100 bronze mirrors. Following her death, Yamatai experienced brief political instability under an unnamed male successor, maybe her son, before stability returned under Queen Toyo. There is a location debate going back centuries. The exact geographical center of Yamatai remains one of the most heavily debated topics in early Japanese history due to conflicting distance and directional details in Chinese itineraries. The Northern Kyushu theory asserts that Yamatai was located either in northern Kyushu near Asian mainland trade routes, supported by major Yayoi-moated settlements like the Yoshinogari site in the Saga Prefecture. Meanwhile, in the Kinnai or Yamato theory, it's argued that Yamatai occupied the central Kinnai region in modern-day Nara Prefecture, highlighting archaeological discoveries at the Makimuku site and the Hashihaka burial mound, a leading candidate for Himiko's tomb. But none of these places are in the middle of the ocean. In fact, they are in the main Japanese island chain. What could have influenced a lot of the game's, at least settings, is back in 2009, archaeologists found a massive stilt house near Makimuku in Sakurai Nara, which points to that area being the real spot for Yamatai Koku. Excavations there turned up all kinds of artifacts, wooden pieces like masks and a part of a shield, clay pots and vases that match styles from all over Japan, and a large amount of pollen used for fabric dye. On top of that, Makimuku is home to the Hashihaka burial mound, believed to be the first keyhole monumental structure, Kofun, in Japan, which many think is the actual tomb of Queen Himiko, the ruler of Yamatai. The Kofun tombs are what the next period of Japanese history is actually named for. The Kofun period, from circa 300 to 538 CE. And the Kofun tombs are key-shaped and are associated with the emergence of the Yamato kingship. Linguists and historians continue to analyze how ancient Chinese phonetic renderings correspond to old Japanese speech patterns. While Chinese scribes transcribed the polity phonetically as Yamatai or Yamadai, early native chronicles like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki transcribed Yamato using phonetic characters known as Manyogana that eventually evolved into the kanji spelling. But getting back to the game, Himiko could summon storms, which San attributes to her shamanistic mystical powers. But to the best of my knowledge, even her enemies didn't write that about her. That was mostly in Japan, too. If anything, they just tried to erase her from history. Sam says, and she's very proud, that she's Himiko's descendant, which, of course, leads her to getting abducted. I guess that was probably going to happen anyway. The court recordings do say that they've tried the ritual before. But why didn't they take Laura? I guess, there'd be no game. Or it'd just be a very different one. More gameplay comments. Why was a sacrifice hung up while still holding his bow? They could have used that. It's not like they were giving him a respectful burial anyway. The first journal entry we get is from a Japanese soldier in World War II, and it mentions Chinese partitions, American GIs, and Oni. One of these things is not like the other. I wonder if any of the survivors ever became allies, even if they were on different sides, kind of like in that one Twilight Zone episode, but obviously not the full Adam and Eve metaphor that is provided in that episode, though who knows? Another game-y thing. When Laura was talking to Roth over the walkie-talkie, and then Laura says she's gonna come to him. Roth never said where he was, let alone the direction that Laura should go to find him. How did she know where to go? Let's just say her walkie-talkie has a homing device for both of them. They can also reach over vast distances, so there you go. As we've already seen, there are a number of different symbols that pop up everywhere in the background of the game. The first would be the sun. Most times when they show the basic sun, it's almost a square shape with the shining rays around it. Sometimes it's a circle, but why not make it more of a circle? But maybe the cult, named the Solari, don't want to be closely related with Japan itself, as it is, the flag is the sun. Or maybe they were connecting it more with the square character for sun, which is also from Chinese. But who knows? Maybe it was just an easier way to render in the game system. The sun symbol might more closely tie with the cult itself than with Himiko worship, though it could go either way, as there are often handprints underneath it, like those are new members joining. Another symbol is a sort of spiral shape. In real life, this is called a tomoe symbol, which primarily refers to a traditional, quote, comma-like swirl symbol, unquote. It also can refer to a legendary female warrior and a popular lightweight paper brand, the last of which has no connection to this nor the game, just thought it was funny to mention. A comma or tadpole-shaped swirl, most often seen in the trio in a circle, Mitsu Donome, which is what we see in the game, are reminiscent of similar designs that have been found in wide distribution around the world, such as the Triskelion. Symbol's meaning has been deeply tied to Shintoism, often representing Hachiman, the god of war and archery, and family crests, Kamon. The Gatai linked the symbol to ancient comma-shaped Magatama jewels or Tomo leather arm guards worn by archers. As a leather wrist protector, Tomo appear to have been employed at least as early as the Kofun period, where they are frequently attested on Haniwa terracotta figurines depicting archers, and may even had, aside from their military function, a ritual or fetish value, perhaps related to their phallic shape. Which is pretty cool because that's the first way that Laura has to fight back, other than kicking. The pattern has also been interpreted as water swirling, and that's because it is a water-related pattern. The Tomo pattern was applied to roof tiles on buildings at the end of the Heian period as fire protection. Like I said, it wasn't only an abstract symbol. It was the name of a woman named Tomoe Gozen, just a Onamusha, female samurai warrior of the Genpei War in the late 12th century, even though she may have not actually been real since she wasn't in any of the war accounts. Does make me think of Mulan, but much later in time. She was renowned in the tale of Heike for exceptional bravery, skill with the bow, and naginata, and striking beauty. Not sure if the game developers meant to do this, but it could have tied the basic character ideas of Laura and Himiko together. Or at least a badass warrior woman. The paint in the game also has a lot of tally marks. The first time I saw it, I counted 63. But they show up so many times during the game that I just completely gave up. They all look like the same number. Maybe 63 means something, but I don't know. Speaking a lot of something, there are so many bottles. Where did they get them all? They're all different colors and shapes, too. It's not like there were hundreds of cruise ships crashing ashore. But this was the actual point while watching the walkthrough that I got to the cutscene when Laura finds Sam and Matthias. Other than what I've already said, Sam says Himiko was ruthless and powerful, using her shamanistic powers to cause storms. Also that she commanded her storm guard warriors who, quote, rode the very winds to battle, laying waste to all who opposed them. And that they say the sun rose at Himiko's command, and she ruled everything the rays touched, from the mountains to the sea and beyond. I don't think this is in any texts, but whoever they are, they sure have poetic language. And I know that Himiko is called the Sun Queen in the game. This is based on the Japanese legend that identifies Himiko as Emperor Suinen's daughter, who enshrined the sun goddess's sacred mirror at Ise around 5 BCE, a city in the present Mie Prefecture. More reliable 3rd century Chinese records, however, confirm that an unmarried queen named Himiko ruled Yamatai as both a political monarch and high priestess. The characters used to represent Himiko mean sun child or sun daughter in archaic Japanese. And it is interesting to note that later Japanese rulers claimed to be descendants from the sun goddess. Although usually that's Amaterasu. I'll get a little bit more into that in a little bit. Getting back to Sam's monologue, she did make mention of Himiko's elite warriors, Storm Guards, which all the fandom information tells me are the Oni that you have to fight, even though they are so adept at taking out Laura's enemies. Just wanted them to do it. While searching for any real-world connection, I looked to do a translation, because just typing in Storm Guards, Japanese, and history and mythology wasn't getting me anywhere. Japanese, storm is arashi, and guard or protector is shugo, or eiji, so guard or sentinel. Combined literally, a descriptive compound for a storm guard or storm warrior can be expressed as arashi no mamori or fubo no eiji. But when I looked these terms up, the only results either connected straight to Tomb Raider itself or to a 3-volume book series that takes place in Ireland. So I'm pretty sure the game people made up this whole warrior class. A lot of more results were taking me to samurai, but I'll discuss later why that is also incorrect. Matthias then asks what happened to her. But we never get Sam's answer because Laura falls asleep, and when she wakes up, Sam and Matthias are gone. As the game progresses, there are staircases and monasteries all over the island. There are also shrines, and a lot of the shrines look like Buddhist shrines. During that time that the original Himiko would have still been alive, Japanese architecture was defined by the Yamatai period. As I talked about earlier, one of the ways archaeologists thought they found Yamatai was through the stilt houses, which do match the houses, at least partially, in the game. However, during the Yamatai and following the early Kofun period, pit dwellings were for everyday life, along with the elevated wooden structures, which were mostly for the raised floor granaries to protect harvested rice and communal goods from ground moisture and pests. Pit houses were round or square with rounded corners, but technically the pit houses weren't actually pits because they weren't set beneath the surface. These humbler dwellings were built over shallow pits like homes in the earlier Gomon period. However, unlike Gomon pit houses, many Yayoi buildings did not have interior fireplaces and so must have been colder residences than those of the Gomon period. Architecturally advanced forms were the buildings that had iramoya thatched roofs that flared out on the sides. This flared roof style became the style for residences and palaces, miya, for shaman leaders, chiefs, and other elite tribal members of society. At Yoshinogari, the largest of the Yayoi sites in Japan, there is evidence that many large residences for local chiefs and leaders, meeting and ceremonial halls, and raised floor granaries were constructed along with the structures such as watchtowers and the enclosing palisades, fences with sharp stakes, that have been likely constructed for defensive purposes. But the game doesn't really show any of these average people's normal homes. The buildings are all very beautiful, and it's obvious a ton of work was done by the developers and renderers. But maybe they were assuming that only the wealthy would live on the island and everyone else would boat in daily to construct things? Anyway, when talking about construction, usually workers live in the same places where they'd be working, especially for material. Village settlements would have featured clustered pit houses alongside larger timber structures reserved for the local chieftains or ritual gatherings. I guess maybe those buildings didn't last over the centuries or were turned down and replaced with better housing as time went on and more people came to the island. Anything's possible. It's a fictional game. In addition, though these houses are very disheveled and look like they've been abandoned for a long time, they do still look distinctly Japanese. The housing structures that we typically recognize as quintessential Japanese homes, with sliding paper doors, tatsumi mat floors, and minimalist wooden interiors, didn't really begin becoming quintessential until the Heian period, starting in 794 to 1185 CE. And they reached their definitive form by the Azuchi, Momoyama, and early Edo periods, the 14th to 17th centuries, though the pagoda-style architecture did come into popularity during the Asuka period thanks to the rise of Buddhism. But even that was much later. But a huge point is that all of this game's backstory plot predates the arrival of continental Buddhist temple architecture by centuries. There were absolutely no monasteries in Japan when Himiko was alive, since Shintoism did not have any monasteries. It officially arrived from the mainland in Asia in nearly 300 years later in the mid-6th century, so around 538 or 552 BCE. When Buddhism was introduced through the diplomatic missions of the Korean peninsula in Baekje, It brought continental timber architecture, heavily tiled roofs, and complex bracket complexes to Japan for the first time. The very first Buddhist monasteries and temples in Japan were in the late 6th century, specifically in 590 CE. And also, like, all the shrines that they have that you have to light on fire or something like that, or just visit, they all reminded me of the Buddhist shrines in Southeast Asia and Korea, especially as they were sitting and they had their hands out in the Buddhist offering stance. They brought architectural innovations for their monasteries, like the kiln-fired ceramic roof tiles to replace primitive thatch and barked roofing, stone foundation blocks so massive timber pillars no longer rotted in the bare dirt, complex interlocking wood brackets to distribute the immense weight of wide sweeping roofs, and crimson paint and white plaster walls, which heavily contrasted with the unpainted wood of indigenous Shinto shrines. So in these ways, the game is really getting ahead of itself in the real life timeline. Although I guess a lot of these things could have been built later, but Himiko was buried in a tomb in the monastery. But I'll get to that. I'll complain more about that later. While Laura is exploring with Whitman, they come across the painting that Whitman says, quote, "From the age of the symbols, it could be the Sun Queen," unquote. But the images were made with white paint recently. What gives? Laura is the one who says Himiko, but is there a chance that Whitman meant someone else? Or was he saying because it's so recent, the cult must worship the Sun Queen? Whitman adds that, quote, "There's no doubt that Himiko had power, shamanistic, elemental," unquote. This is when Laura says, a woman wields that much power, and sooner or later it gets called witchcraft. But Whitman counters, we shouldn't discount anything, even what may seem to us irrational. We still have much to learn about the world. The conversation kind of goes on, but what's really interesting to me is that Himiko was called the Sun Queen and made the sun rise and set, but controlled storms. We're getting at a massive crossover into another goddess's territory here, and another god's. Amaterasu Omikami. She is the sun goddess and the chief deity of the Shinto religion in Japanese mythology. Her name means the great divinity that illuminates heaven. Recorded in ancient texts like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki that I mentioned earlier, she is considered the mythical ancestor of the Imperial House of Japan. I wonder if that was some kind of rewrite that they did later in time. Although she was from before, because that's what Himiko was named after, so who knows. According to myth, she was born from the left eye of her father, the creator god Izanagi, while he was washing his face during a purification ritual. Her brothers are Susanoo, the storm and sea god, and the moon god, Tsukuyomi. She is the ruler of Takamagahara, the highest celestial plane of the gods. Her main myth is known as the cave myth, Amano Iwato, in which Amaterasu is angered by the destructive and chaotic behavior of her brother Susanoo, so Amaterasu hides in the heavenly rock cave. As the sun, when she hides, the world is in total darkness, letting cold and evil spirits thrive. The other gods hold a big festival outside the cave and just do a bunch of fun things to try and coax her out. Eventually, the goddess Ame no Uzume performed either a funny, passionate dance, causing gathered deities to roar with laughter, or a sexy dance to catch Amaterasu's interest, depending on the storyteller. Whichever version you hear, the dance works as either curiosity about the commotion or just the dancer. Wink. Amaterasu peeked outside and she saw her reflection in a sacred mirror. Strong gods then pulled her out, or at least kept her out, which restored light to the universe. Now that was a little bit of a tangent, but was Himiko supposed to be a goddess, a shaman, or a witch? They never try to explain where she got her powers, because just saying she was a shaman doesn't answer any questions. Admittedly, that's probably for the best. Shamans don't control the weather. As far as I know, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, they act as priests, as the connection between humans and the gods. Shinto gods in this respect. But Himiko doesn't actually have any myths like that, or what they claim in the game, that she was a conqueror. But in fact, it was legendary that when she came to power, she ended a long-standing war, and there was peace throughout her reign. And there's so much more to get into in this series. It is going to be a hot second as I dive into different aspects of Japanese mythology and this game. But I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Detours in Archaeology. This will be a part 1 of I don't know how many, called The Tomb Raider vs. the Storm Queen, Yamatai Cage Grudge Match. I'll probably change the name. If you have any suggestions, contact me. I definitely want to thank you for your patience in my horrible pronunciation of Japanese words. I really appreciate it. All the background music comes from Scott Buckley and can be found at scottbuckley.com.au. If there's anything that I missed that you want to draw attention to, if there's any facts that I got wrong, please let me know. We all want to learn the right things, so I definitely encourage involvement. You can leave a comment on this video if you're watching it on YouTube, on the podcast if you're listening, wherever you're listening to your podcasts. You can also email me directly at detoursinarchaeology@gmail.com, and I can call it out in my next episode. You can also find and follow me on Blue Sky. You can join my Patreon for free. I have a Discord that is also under the name Detours in Archaeology. Or you can follow me on Instagram for more artistic shots and a lot of random field stuff. More travel shots and nature shots. At Flying Sepida, the scientific name for cuttlefish, SEPIIDA. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode or any other episode with your friends, with your enemies, or with random people that you don't actually know. That is the best way to help me grow, and I'd really, really appreciate it. For the fun fact today, it's just going to be a little short thing about, I don't know if you can tell, but I have a cold right now, and I've been blowing out my nose for days. I did try to edit out all the sniffles and coughs. And so I was curious. I wondered if what my parents said was true about having green versus yellow snot, meaning you have a biological versus a viral infection. I never knew which was which, but I looked it up online and it took me to the Harvard Medical School website. Apparently that whole thing has been debunked. Mucus snot is, green because according to Dr. Robert Schmerling at Harvard Medical, the white blood cells in the mucus encounter an irritant or an infectious organism, and they respond by producing enzymes to repel the invaders. These enzymes create iron, which is one of the reasons nasal discharge may be green. And if the mucus sits around as when you're sleeping, it becomes more concentrated and may appear darker yellow or green. They say it's a natural order of things, whether the offending agent is a virus or a bacteria. I also read that while color doesn't tell you what's actually hurting you, it can tell you some things. If your snot is clear or white, you have normal hydration, or maybe a viral or early allergy response. If it's pink, red, or brown, there's probably some bleeding or trapped environmental dust and dirt in there. I just always know that it's not a real field day in archaeology or paleontology, or just working on the field in general, if you don't end the day with dust coming out of your nose. So I think it is definitely more important to know that, as if you have black snot, then there's probably pollution exposure, or smoking or secondhand smoke, or it could be drug use. White is generally just congestion. But no matter what your snot is, make sure to wash your hands after you blow your nose. And cough into your elbow. And wear a mask when needed. So political. Oh, God. If you have any fun facts that you want to share, don't hesitate to contact me whatever way you want, and I can share with everybody else. So the next time we're gonna have more Lara Croft. It'll be part 2 of the first game. Oh, I went to Gen Con last weekend while I'm recording this, and I got some really interesting ideas to talking about game development and mythology. So that will be coming eventually. But until then, all those dates, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep taking those detours. Keep playing games. Thanks.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.